Hey, good morning, Harbor Covenant. It is good to see you. Hey, I want to share with you some of my 5-star moments. Like when you experience these moments, you're like, yes. 1, flipping your pillow over to the cold side in the middle of the night. You're like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. How about surprise pizza in the fridge? You open it up and you're like, oh, pizza for lunch. Another 5-star moment. Maybe this is for you if you remember having young kids or you have young kids, the successful transfer of your child to the crib with the arm swoop out and then the quiet exit out of the door and they don't wake up. Oh, it's a glorious moment. Or maybe even the most glorious moment of all is getting that first knife full of peanut butter when you open it up and you get to like break that goodness open. Those are 5-star moments. I live for those moments in my life, and maybe you have some of your own. But imagine though the 1-star moments. Imagine you're looking maybe for a place to eat. And you find a restaurant online, and it's been open for 20 years. It's served tens of thousands of meals. It has a beautiful dining room, a friendly staff, great food, and you're scrolling through the reviews because you're like, I'm going to take my date there. And there's one single glaring 1-star review written in all caps, and the reviewer says something like, the soup was cold, the waiter sneezed, the entire evening was ruined. Right? What happens in your brain? If you have my brain is even if there are 500 5-star reviews, my eyes are drawn to that terrible 1-star review. You forget about the decades of good service. You forget about the chef's hard work. All you can think about is, I don't want that cold soup either. So you define that entire restaurant by its very worst day. And I think we don't just do it with restaurants. I think we do it with each other and with ourselves. We do it with people. We live in a culture of reduction, and that's a problem. The problem is that a culture of reduction treats humans like products, and we are incredibly quick to reduce a person's entire life, their entire character, down to their worst 1-star moment. So a teenager makes the bad choice. They get labeled as troublemaker. A friend drops the ball once, and now all of a sudden they're the unreliable one. Your spouse says something hurtful in an argument, and that single sentence is held over their head for a decade. We take a complex, beautiful, messy human being, and we define them by their absolute worst day. And we don't just stop with their actions. We do it with their very identities. We flatten the kaleidoscope of human life into a single data point. We see a person's ethnicity and we decide we already know their story. We look at someone's bank account and we assumed we've measured their worth. We hear how they love and we think we've solved the puzzle of their character. We have all these trigger words that we listen for. And I think it's a form of intellectual and spiritual laziness to pin someone to just a background or a preference or a tax bracket. We exempt ourselves from doing the hard work of actually getting to know someone and creating a blessing of a peaceful community. We take a multi-dimensional soul to a one-dimensional character because it's easier just to categorize a person. And the tragedy doesn't stop there because we do it not just to others, but we do it to ourselves. If you walked into the room today, maybe you're carrying a label from years ago. The addict, the divorcee, the failure, the bad parent. We have let our lowest moments become our permanent identity. And we define ourselves or others by that single failure. We completely rob ourselves of the grace of growing. So for this week's Lenten deep cut, we're going to look at a man in the Bible who, if he was still alive, I think he would know exactly how this moment feels. If anyone understands what it's like to have their entire life reduced and defined by one terrible, vulnerable moment, it would have been the disciple Thomas. He had a lifetime of faithfulness, but history has slapped a 1-star review on him. And today we're going to look at the rest of his story. Because in doing so, I think we're going to discover that going all in with your faith is being honest about where you're at and confessing those things, but also a commitment to following Jesus regardless. So let's play a little game. This is the word association game. I'm going to say a name, and you think about what is the first word that comes to mind in your head. Ready? Albert Einstein. Genius. Yes. Madonna. Okay. Harry Winkler. Isn't that the Foz? The Fonz? I wasn't alive. Sorry. Mr. Beast. And then Sabrina Carpenter. See, yeah, who? Those. I try to get all the generations in that one. Now about the big names in the Bible. So we always have an association with the name, especially if they're famous. If I say Judas, you might say traitor, right? If I say Peter, you might say the rock or the denier even. And if I say Thomas, I might not even have to guess. You're going to say doubter. Universally across the globe, Thomas has gotten the nickname Doubting Thomas, which is wild because Peter had some low moments in the Bible. We don't call him Sinking Peter. We don't call James and John Arrogant James and John because they asked to sit at Jesus' right and left hands. But Thomas gets stuck with that label, because he makes this famous mistake in John 20. He's earned this permanent 1-star review. So Jesus, a little bit of background. Jesus has just been crucified. The disciples are traumatized and terrified, and they're hiding in the locked room because they think the authorities are coming after them next. And for some reason, Thomas isn't with them. Maybe he's needed some air. Maybe he is just a guy that needs to isolate when he grieves. Maybe he's finally come back into the room, and the other disciples are buzzing, and they're like, "We have seen the Lord." And if you put yourselves in Thomas's shoes, this man just gave his entire life to following Jesus, and then watched him publicly tortured and executed. His heart is shattered. And now his friends are making this impossible claim that he's back. And out of grief, out of his exhaustion, out of his deep fear of getting maybe his hopes crushed again, he says this: "Unless I see the nails marked in his hands, and I put my finger where the nails were, and I put my hand into his side, I will not believe." Was it a lapse in faith? Maybe. Some say yes. I lean towards that's debatable. I think it just meant so much to him. He wasn't going to mess around with hope if it wasn't going to be there. But it was for sure a deeply human moment of vulnerability and trauma. And yet, because of his 1 week of doubt, just a handful of days in an otherwise faithful life, he's been branded in history. Every painting, every Sunday school lesson, every passing joke about skepticism zeroes in on this single moment. His entire life, his ministry, his sacrifices, his love for Jesus is all overshadowed by this worst day. And history has reduced this complex, devoted friend of Jesus down to his weakest moment of grief. And to totally understand how unfair this label is, and how tragic it is that we've reduced Thomas to his worst day, I want to rewind the tape. We need to look at who Thomas was before this trauma of the crucifixion. And trust me, in John chapter 11, this is the deep cut part, because we forget about this part of Thomas. I'm going to set it up. In John 11, in verses 1 through 6, Jesus gets word that his dear friend Lazarus is terribly sick. This is a popular story. By the time Jesus tells his disciples it's time to go see him, Lazarus has already died. But the massive problem here is with the travel destination. Lazarus lives in Bethany, which is just a couple of miles outside of Jerusalem, right in the heart of Judea. And if you were here last week, you realized that if Jesus goes there, he's going to be captured. They want him dead. We learned this a few chapters earlier. The leaders in Judea picked up rocks to try to stone Jesus to death, and he barely escapes. So when Jesus says in verse 7, "Let's go back to Judea," the disciples practically lose their minds, and they say in verse 8, "Rabbi, a short while ago, the Jews tried to stone you, and yet you're going back?" Put yourself in the circle of those men. They are terrified, Going back to Judea feels like a guaranteed death sentence, a suicide mission. They're all looking at each other, trying to figure out how to talk Jesus out of this moment. And then comes a courageous moment from Thomas in verse 16. Into that heavy and terrified silence, one disciple speaks up. It's not Peter. It's not John. It's Thomas. And he says in verse 16, then Thomas said to the rest of his disciples, let us also go so that we may die with him. If you look at the absolute loyalty of this statement, it's inspiring. Thomas isn't offering a, hey guys, cheer up, God will protect us. He looks it straight, the reality of the situation, straight in the face. He is a pessimist. This is not going to end well. And he fully expects that they will walk into Judea and they will not walk out. He will probably die too, but he decides to go anyway. Thomas looks at what he believes is certain death, and he says, if Jesus is walking into that fire, I will walk with him into that fire. I'd rather die next to him than live without him. And so it's wild that we don't call him courageous Thomas. We don't call him all in Thomas. We don't call him my ride or die Thomas, because it is our human nature to fixate on flaws. We look at a man with the courage to march to his own education for the sake of his friend and his teacher and his Lord, and it's all erased because he struggled with doubt later on in the story because his heart was broken. And if you want to pay attention to how Jesus handles our worst mistakes, we need to pay attention to how he handles Thomas. If you want to know how God feels about you on your worst day, I want you to look at how he treats Thomas. If we go back to the locked room in John 20, we finally see that Jesus appears to Thomas, and what does he do? He doesn't roll his eyes. He doesn't say, wow, Thomas, I thought you were all big talk back in John 11, but now I see that you just doubt. You are officially demoted. Doesn't do that either. He doesn't mock him. He doesn't excommunicate him from the discipleship team. He doesn't slap a label on him at all. Instead, he steps right into Thomas's messy, traumatized doubt, and he offers exactly what he needs. He holds out his scarred hands. He shows him his side, and he meets him right where he is. We learn that Jesus redeems our lowest moments. And I want you to take some time, because it is time to stop introducing yourself to God using the label of your worst mistake. Many of us have been wearing a 1-star review as our name tag. We've convinced ourselves because we've hit rock bottom, whether we have a fractured marriage or a hidden addiction or a blown temper, that the basement is just our dwelling place now. But if we remember, Jesus is in the business of renewal. And first by his grace. Before we even take a step towards him, God has already moved towards you. And this is no better illustrated than when my dog, he's about this big, his name is Tucker, leaves our house. He is a very good dog, except for one moment. If you leave the door open for too long, he bolts. He's this little thing. I'm afraid like a hawk's going to get him or something. And he takes off and he runs down the street or he runs up the street. And we all know in our family, Tucker's out. We all go try to get him. We run after him. He's not turning back to us. We have to go get him. We found him in yards. We found him playing with another neighbor's cat. He bolts. We have to go get him. Grace is a rescue operation for when we run off. I imagine we bolt out of the house and God's like, all right, I'm going to go get him again. We often think that we need to fix our lives before we can face God. But the gospel flips that script. You don't need to clean yourself up before you come to God. The act of coming to him is how you are made clean. Romans 5:8 says, but God demonstrates his own love for this, that while we were still sinners, while we were running down the street away from home, Christ died for us. He defines us by the finished work on the cross, not by our moments. That we aren't defined. There is no comma in our story. Our lowest moments are not the commas in our story. They are never the period. There's always something more. So it's first by his grace, but we have some ownership in this as well. It's also by our honesty. While the table of grace has been set for us, There is space at that table designed for honesty and confession. We often try to ignore our failures, hoping they'll just fade away or swept under a rug, but they're still there. Grace is a light that shines through our darkest moments. And confession, the practice of confession, isn't about informing God of something he doesn't know. He already knows that moment has happened. He already knows we've bolted out of the house. It's about alignment. Confession is, as C.S. Lewis famously noted, he says, lay down your arms, surrender, say you're sorry, realize that you have been on the wrong track, and be prepared to begin life over again. It is the only way out of a hole. When we agree with God about our mess, yeah, I ran away. Yeah, I did that. We give him permission to clean it up. Confession becomes this bridge between the person that you were in the valley and the person that God is calling you to be. And that's this part of Lent, is a big part of Lent is confessing, taking inventory of our life and saying, oh, I need to change that. I'm messing up on some things here. I'm putting hope in the wrong places. I'm getting lost in the fear of the world around me. And I confess, I'm a lot like Thomas. I need a lot of proof before I believe something. I look around the world, and I've said this quite often, it's like I could convince myself out of faith any day. And it is because it just means something it means so much to me. And I'm reminded of Jesus's moments when Thomas is shown all the sides. Jesus says, Thomas, you believe because you have seen, but blessed are those who believe and they haven't seen. And that really hits me. It's like, okay, I need to be someone that believes even though I haven't seen. So it's in grace, it's in confession, but it's also in our commitment. You're welcome. We say this, or Michael said this a lot, is you're welcome here just the way you are, but we hope you don't stay that way. That's just who I am narrative doesn't work. Redemption is a gift, but it is also there to inspire us to act and to change. That might mean making some personal commitments, making that awkward phone call to apologize, getting help from a program like Celebrate Recovery, or maybe setting some healthier boundaries. It might even mean making some commitments to your community as well, laying down your sword. Try standing with people instead of standing on issues. Try cleaning the lenses of which you see the world. It's about choosing the difficult right thing to do over the easier wrong thing to do. And the Apostle James reminds us that faith without works is dead. So we just have to act in it. It's not something that we just get to sit in and just be like, this is great. No, and if you're like me, you hear the faith without works is dead, and then you read Thomas's response, and you're like, well, it looks like faith with works is also going to get you dead. But that's not how faith it's bigger than that. If you look at, I think of what it took for Thomas to make that Grimm commitment. To say, I'm going to go, and if Jesus is going to die, I'm going to go with him. He understood the grace that he had experienced from the Lord, and he was honest with himself and his need for God. He went in expecting death, and one of the greatest parts of this story is they get there, and it's that Lazarus story, and he experiences life instead. He witnesses Jesus take a dead man and to bring him back to life. So Thomas went in with this wild expectation of this is not going to end well, and experienced a miracle. And I think when we have that same attitude, that same posture, we follow Jesus in this Grimm commitment, even when things don't look the happiest, don't be surprised when you find life there waiting for you. So history might call him Doubting Thomas, but history doesn't get the final word. Jesus does. And because Jesus didn't give up on Thomas in that locked room, Thomas didn't give up on his mission. Do you want to know what happened after John 20? Thomas didn't shrink into the shadows. Church history says that Thomas took the gospel further than almost any disciple. He traveled all the way to India. He planted churches. He healed the sick. He preached the resurrection of Jesus Christ to the people who had never even heard his name before. And ultimately, tradition tells us that Thomas found his death. He was martyred there. He went in the name of Jesus and he died for it. He gave his life to Jesus and the gospel all the way to the end. And maybe his let us all go so that we may die with him to the very end is for us to hear as well. How all in am I in my faith? So what does this mean for us today? Well, what do we do with the story of a man who is brave, a man who is broken, and a man who is ultimately redeemed? I think our calling is simple, but it isn't easy. Don't give up. Don't give up on God. When the horizon looks dark, when the road ahead feels terrifying, remember the faith of Thomas in John 11. You don't have to feel happy and perfectly at peace to be faithful. You can be scared to death and say, I will go anyway. Don't give up on yourself. When you have your John 20 moments, when you fail, when your faith wavers, when your grief is loud and your hope is quiet, do not slap a permanent label of shame on yourself. The God of the universe doesn't define you by your worst day. Jesus hasn't written you off, and so you don't get to write yourself off either. And then thirdly, don't give up on others. When the people in your life have a bad day, a bad month, a bad year, don't reduce them to that moment. Give them grace. Give them room to grow. And refuse others who tell you to reduce others to an idea or a trope or a problem or an enemy. That will be risky. It will put you in, but have the courage like Thomas to do it anyways. We are all seen. We are all loved, just like Thomas. Our story is far from over, so don't give up. So I have 3 questions for you. What are some of the worst labels that we give ourselves and we give others? What are some things that you need God to do to redeem your life? And what are the conditions of the lenses of which you view the world? And do you need to commit to clearing them out or changing them?